Well, I see that it's 10 a.m. straight up on the dot. So let's go ahead and get this our webinar started this morning. Um, Sam, I think you've got everyone started coming in from the let them into the Zoominar. So thank you. Welcome, and I want to wish everyone a very pleasant good morning wherever you may be. I'm Julie Arthur. I'm the CASH chair, and I'm Executive Director of Facilities and Planning at Palm Springs Unified School District. And on the screen with me this morning, we have Jeff Becker, who's CASH's Vice Chair, and he's with the Office of Fresno County Superintendent of Schools. So CASH has been providing you with weekly webinars in order to serve our members with the latest and best information in helping school districts, county offices of education, our consultants and vendors with the return of students and teachers to our schools. In our case, August, some will be September, and whatever that form of school will take. So last week, CASH's webinar was FEMA Disaster Funding, Counting Every Dollar. It discussed opportunities and advice on seeking disaster assistance from the Federal Emergency Management Agency and the level of scrutiny the FEMA audits will require and how to start preparing for those. So if you weren't with us, or if you were and want to check back in, there's a recording with the questions and answers up on the CASH website. So CASH has provided a COVID-19 link, so click on that and you'll see all the past webinars or web shops on that. And you're able to download that and see what you missed. So today's webinar is School Social Distancing Logistics. So that's going to be interesting. I know it's getting a lot more real. We're August 5th is what we're planning to open. And so each day becomes a different opportunity for us. And we've, as of last week, we thought we were going in one direction. And as of our board meeting Tuesday night, it looks like we're going in a different direction. So I don't know, Jeff, it's changing and we'll just roll with those punches. So how are things going in Fresno County up there?
I can relate to your comments, Julie. In Fresno County, unfortunately, we're seeing an uptick in cases here. So that kind of has people on edge as to what's going to happen with that. So that's what's happening with the COVID-19. Just on the ground here, we released our FCSS protocols on Monday. So we broadcast to all of our employees of how we were going to return to the office and a bit about how we're coming back to school in August. And we're really trying to identify the areas as we get questions and comments from our staff as to where we need to make adjustments, where we need to put some more explanation into our protocols so that we really are in sync with each other as we open up our doors in the offices on July 1st. So that's had me busy. I'm visiting all of our office sites, giving them supplies, answering questions they have so that we're as prepared as we can be on July 1st. And then as soon as we do that, then we're really turning our attention to our school sites to do the same thing with them, but more of a school opening focus. And again, with our populations, it's exciting. With students with special needs, there's a whole nother set of issues that we're trying to address. So yeah, we're very busy. Anything else going on down in Palm Springs with you?
So we open back up full time. So we're open to the public now from 7:30 to noon. We've opened our district office and we'll open up full time come July 6th. But we've seen the same thing, uptick in Riverside County on the infection rate. And in fact, the headline of the paper today down here was the county may reimpose going backwards with more restrictions to try and curb it. Again, it's difficult. Every day seems to be difficult and changing, but just trying to figure out what we're going to do. How are the deliveries of the PPEs coming? I know that they're going to be going to the county offices to hand out.
Well, I've heard of some small deliveries going out to county offices. I'm still waiting for my delivery in Fresno County. My fingers are crossed that I'll get word from the Office of Emergency Services today or tomorrow with a delivery date sometime next week. But yeah, we're sharing with our school districts the quantities that we're expecting for them so they can continue with their planning. We don't want to slow anyone down with trying to procure other PPE that they might need in that process. But yeah, we are in a holding pattern waiting to spring into action when we get that call.
I think I heard you say, may have been yesterday, that the PPEs that the county's giving out should be a backup plan. not to put those as their frontline plan, which I thought was great advice.
Yeah, I want to make sure that we take care of our people no matter what happens, and this will be fantastic if we get it, but I'm also making sure that I've got sources lined up. And the amount of PPE, while it is significant, depending on your local plans, you may need significantly more PPE than is coming from the Office of Emergency Services.
Yeah, no, good point.
Well, shall I jump into a little bit of housekeeping, Julie?
Absolutely.
All right, so first of all, thank you for joining us. I see that we're up at about 120 attendees so far, so thanks for joining us, and probably even more will be joining us as we move along this morning. So you are muted, but we would like you to ask questions as we go along, so please use the chat feature, and make sure that you're messaging all panelists and attendees using that drop-down arrow in the chat box. And we're also recording this webinar for future reference. As Julie mentioned, I've used that as a resource quite a few times to catch up or refresh myself on what our panelists have shared with us. So again, there on your screen is the area where you would select all panelists and attendees. That way everybody sees the questions that you have as you're typing that in there. Now let me introduce our panelists. We have quite a few folks and really just fantastic knowledge in our panelists today. We're going to start off with Nancy Chavez Espinosa from Murdoch, Walworth and Holmes, and Alan Rising, one of our CASH board members from Long Beach Unified. We also have Jane Christakos from San Bernardino City Unified School District, and Tom Pace, also with San Bernardino City. Tova Corman's going to join us. Bianca Barkman and Jeremy Kogan from Santa Ana Unified. Scott Hammond from Erickson Hall Construction, Kari Knowles from DLR Group, and Nick McFadden from ProCraft Construction. So just a wealth of knowledge with our panelists today. So Nancy and Alan, let me turn the screen over to you and share with us your perspectives on the pandemic culture and getting Elk Grove and Long Beach Unified back open.
Good
Great.
morning. Alan was the better student, so he actually prepared slides. I'm going to let him go first, if that's okay with you, Alan.
That'll work. That'll work. Good morning, Nancy. How you doing this morning?
I'm well.
Good, good. So I think it's important. I think a lot of what Jeff and Julie were talking about is very, very important as we go forward, because many of us, I think all of us, are really trying to kind of wade through a lot of changing perspectives. And so what I'm going to talk about today isn't so much about answers, because I think we don't really have them yet, to be quite honest. As we talked with our community groups and as we talked with the various different stakeholder groups, we're being very open and transparent that we're still in the process of trying to figure out answers. And some of these questions that we have to wade ourselves through are going to be very complex. And unfortunately, I think they're not going to, there's going to be some, I call it winners and losers as we go through this process, because it will definitely change the perspectives of everyone about what a school will look like and how a school will be run as we go forward. As we go through the process of trying to manage expectations from all of our customer groups, both our teaching groups as well as our in-house folks, our parents, our students, on what the educational offering that we give and how that's going to be changed over time. As we work through the process of managing staff concerns, you know, Julie mentioned she's back to work. We're not fully back to work and opening all our offices yet, but we do have most of our staff back in the offices. We're just not open to the public yet here in Long Beach. Just that alone required us to go through a certain level of process with our folks to get them back and define what they're going to do and what the expectations are. There are changing requirements all the time. The guidance that's being provided to us by all of the different health organizations, Department of Education, the California Public Health is changing. It seems like it's evolving. And then we get governor's executive orders that amend some of those things as we go forward. And managing those changing requirements, it kind of seems like you're, you know, every time you plot out a plan, it seems to adjust slightly. And then really balancing all of this across what really are our capabilities to be able to provide these things. There are some restrictions that we have. There's just the ability to be able to provide some of the things that are being talked about are really taxing all of our resources and capabilities in the district, and how we balance that. So from our perspective, we're really engaging wholly. Now that we've completed and we've closed out the school year, the 2019-2020 school year, we are engaging in a very direct way on how we're going to plan for the next school year. The first thing that we did is we're really looking closely at transparency and communications, and really trying to understand what it is we're trying to hit. What's the mark we're trying to hit? What is the perspective of our community groups that we are serving? We've completed a community survey. We were able to get responses from about 13,600 students and 6th through 11th graders. We felt that getting the perspectives from the younger kids may not provide the kind of value that we were looking for. And obviously seniors don't care because they're on to colleges and careers and those kind of things. So we really focused on 6th through 11th grade students. And then we also focused on parents that represent any child that goes to our school site. And we received comments and responses from just a little over 21,000 parents to kind of give us those perspectives. And in a big perspective, we wanted to ask this survey went much deeper, but some of the big takeaways that we pulled from this survey to get an understanding of what our community is telling us is approximately 40% of our parents were either wholly or completely or partially or completely unsatisfied with our home learning program. And about 43% of our students were also unsatisfied with that offering. You know, some of that we can explain in that this was kind of thrust upon us and we developed it on the fly, but it does show that there was a general level of dissatisfaction related to the home learning program. There's about 60% of the parents have indicated that they want to return to an in-person instructional program, that they do not want to stay in a remote learning program. And there's various different reasons for that, and we'll touch upon that here in just a second, but it does show that there's a very much an interest to get back to school, that our community wants and needs to get back to our schools as quickly as possible. So we can move the slide. So the parents, and we went further, and we asked the parents that do prefer a home learning program. Some of those parents did indicate that they're comfortable in staying in a remote program. What were some of the reasons behind that? And part of that was that they preferred that they felt that there was a lack of this social interaction, or one of the big reasons of staying in a home learning program, concerns about staying in a home learning program. Let's state it that way. I'm sorry, I misspoke. The concerns that they had about staying in a home learning program was the lack of that social interaction with students. They felt that the students, when they stayed home, they were missing out on a major component of the educational program, which was the social interaction with their peers. And they felt that that was going to be a little bit of a challenge. The other thing that they said, that the reason that they wanted to stay at home, about 49% of the parent response were about health and safety concerns, which was a clear light for us that said, if we don't, in a meaningful way, provide some comfort level to parents, they will not be interested in coming back to our schools. So we need to address those health and safety concerns in a very meaningful way to be able to get them to come back. And again, we asked them the question, what is the single greatest concern for your child? And there was a couple of repeat responses, but it all centered around the continuation of learning. They're very concerned that their child is missing out on important educational offerings that we give, that they're very concerned about the continuation of the learning program. And they're also very concerned about the social emotional well-being of their children. Being at home, not having the solid nature of schools and what that provides is a significant concern for those parents. And so we're using this information to help drive how are we attacking the problem, and how are we going to communicate what we're doing with our return to school program to be able to address some of these concerns. And our survey goes much deeper than this, but this is just some takeoffs from the very top. We are holding community forums. In fact, today is our first community forum where we will actually be calling in parents and community groups to talk to us about concerns and issues related to returning to school, because we do want to hear from them. We want to give them the opportunity to give us their opinions about what they want to see in a program next year. So that's going to be an important tool that we use to be able to get that feedback. And the very first one is today, which should be interesting what we get back from that today. So if we can go to the next slide. So to do that, and I'm going
before you go on, how many people will you expect at this forum?
That's a great question. It is a remote forum, so I'm imagining that we're going to have several hundred folks that'll be in this forum. We've invited individuals from all the different grade levels. We've reached out and tried to bring folks in from all the different grade levels to talk to us about it. At this first forum, it's somewhat prescriptive. We've got a prepared kind of a program that we've put in. But there will be additional forums where we're going to open up more for a dialogue with folks as we begin to accept input from them. But it'll be interesting once this is complete, the numbers that we're able to generate from that.
Thank you.
Yeah, absolutely.
Actually, Alan, I've got a question. How are you handling other languages so that those with Spanish or other languages are able to join the forum?
Yes, yes. So that's a great question, because we do have basically like 5 predominant languages that are in our community here that we do provide translational to. So what we're doing is we're actually providing those separate independent translations for those folks. It is one of those things about Zoom and these remote sessions that has been a complicated thing to get over, is how do we provide that? So in those folks that have asked for those translational things, what we've done is we're translating it and providing it to them as a separate submittal or document that we're giving to them.
Thanks, Alan.
So moving forward, we talked about that transparency and communication. So one of the things that we're doing, really, we've decided to really attack this elephant, or eat this elephant one bite at a time. We've created what we call our Health and Safety Operational Task Force. These are some of the programmatic leads in all the different avenues of the district, all the different departments that we've come together in a task force. And each of those task force members have created individual focus groups. We've reached out to a lot of our folks in the district that are experts in their field that have created different areas where we're going to focus on. And these are just some of the task force work groups that we've pulled together. We've got a work group that's working on personal protective equipment. What is that going to mean? How are we going to get it? What are we going to get from the county that Jeff is going to provide to us, or maybe not to us, but definitely to his region? And how is that going to integrate into our operational planning for who's going to get that personal protective equipment, and how is it going to be disseminated out to the school sites? What do we do when little Jimmy doesn't have his face mask when he shows up? What do we do when little Jimmy comes back from the restroom and his face mask is sopping wet, right? I mean, all these are legitimate questions that we have to answer, and be able to have plans in place for doing that. What type of personal protective equipment, and how are we training our teachers so that they're able to use it effectively in the classrooms? We're looking at a shared spaces team that's really talking about all of those transitional spaces at school sites, both the entryway, how are we getting people in and out of schools effectively so that we can comply with social distancing requirements? What about those big gang restrooms that we have at our high schools and our secondary sites? How are we addressing some of those big common shared spaces? The lunch area, are we using a lunch area? What does the auditorium look like? Are we using an auditorium? All of those larger non-classroom based shared spaces, we're really digging deep into that about how are we going to generate those policies to be able to do that. We're looking at health issues and cleaning standards, and this goes all the way from one one of the latest guidelines is that every student needs to wash their hands upon entry to the school. Well, how do we do that? And what, what type of things and equipment do we need to provide in order to address that requirement? When do we need to do that requirement? Is it at the front gate of the school, or is it as they enter the classroom? And then what are the health issues behind it? How do we effectively screen children at a school site? You know, there's talk about temperature screening, taking the temperature of the individuals that arrive. How are we going to do that, and who's going to do that? You know, some of these are somewhat diametrically opposed issues because we don't want to create social distancing challenges when we're trying to do some of these things, but yet we want to do them effectively and efficiently to be able to get folks into schools as quickly as possible and into their learning environments. So we're really trying to address what the health implications with this is. And then what do you do with children that may have been screened out? You know, they've showed up at your school and they have a 106-degree fever, or they show other signs. What do we do? Do we have a light isolation room? How is that isolation room going to be handled? One of the big issues about health screening that we're looking at is not all of our classrooms have sinks. So how do we encourage these students to be able to wash their hands? So all of those things are being dealt with in those areas. Extracurricular activities is a challenge in and of itself. There's recently been some guidelines put out by the National High School Sports Federation to be able to do that, or to help us with some guidelines there. But we have a team that's just looking at extracurricular activities, sports, band, wrestling, gymnastics, all of that stuff that requires, that's beyond the classroom, and how are we going to handle those? Again, I'm going to go through these quickly. We're talking about vulnerable student groups and how do we deal with some of those students that have unique and special needs, and how do we deal with that? Transportation is going to be just a nightmare. Being able to transport the number of students that we transport on a daily basis is going to be problematic. And we're wrestling with some ideas there about how do we do that, and what do we offer as it relates to transportation. What does the classroom environment look like? Many of these classrooms are, I'm going to say this gently and nicely, many of these classrooms are not currently suited for social distancing, that they have a lot of highly valuable instructional materials that have been put in them. And so we have to work towards how do we change that classroom environment and that model so that teachers we have guidelines to help them to know how to outfit their classroom in order to facilitate social distancing. And nutrition services, right? This is gonna materially change how we traditionally provide nutrition services to children, and really looking at all of those avenues. I'd love to say that we have answers for all of these, and we do not. We are working on it, and we have a goal. I think there'll be some other discussions in a few minutes about timelines. Our timeline, our board is planning on meeting and coming up with, I'll call it a baseline plan by the 20th of July. And so we need that amount of time because we're going to use the month of August to actually implement those plans and implement the changes in our school district to be able to implement those plans. So 20th of July is our deadline, and we're working very hard to get all of that done to get there. So kind of some of the things that are happening in Long Beach. I don't know, Nancy, I've been talking for a while. Did you have any comments about that?
Good thing. I'm just going to pause real quick to see if there were any questions specific for you. Let's see. Somebody asked Alan about the request for use of facilities by outside organizations when students return. Is that something you guys have anticipated?
Yes, it's something we've been talking about. And at this point, the general thought is, and this is early, but the general thought is we're probably going to have some level of a moratorium on outside groups to be able to come in and use our spaces. If you think about just the total number of folks that could be, it's somewhat of an uncontrolled dynamic there. So at this point, our discussion has been at least some level of a moratorium on those outside users until we can get the whole program under control. Now, we might get really good at this by the time the second semester comes along, and maybe we can offer some of those spaces up. But at this point, we're talking about a moratorium.
And Alan, just to share with you, I'm glad that Nancy stopped on that question. Marty Hom from Atkinson Andelson, an attorney on our ledge committee, provided a draft board resolution to deal with the very question that was asked, and that is the suspension of Civic Center Act activities. And that's something that's available on the CASH website.
Thank you for that, Marty.
Yeah, thank you. Thank you. Yeah.
So some of you may know, certainly not all of you know, that in addition to my work with Murdoch, Walrath, and Holmes, I also have the honor of serving as a school board member in Elk Grove Unified, which is in Sacramento County. We are the 5th largest school district in the state. About, gosh, I used to know exactly how many square miles, 340 square miles, something like that. Very large, urban, rural, suburban. So a nice microcosm of the entire state. Generally, whatever issues arise anywhere in the state exists somewhere in our district. So we are a lovely laboratory. We have 64,000 students, 67 sites, and about 7,000 employees. And we are one of the remaining school districts in the state that still operates year-round instruction. So recently our board adjusted our calendar and pushed back the start date for some of the tracks in our year-round calendar. The goal of that was that had they started at their original start date at the in mid-July, they would have absolutely had to have been distance instruction. So we pushed them back, frankly, in hopes that they might get as much seat time as other tracks and traditional students could get. So the new start date for our year-round, our 17 year-round sites, is August 3rd. And well, for most of those tracks, it's August 3rd. And for our traditional and modified traditional, it's August 13th, which is their regular start date. My district also has issued a parent survey, but it is still out. It's been out for about 10 days. And I've actually just asked for clarification on when we're going to close that. I think we have been holding it open longer just to try to drum up additional responses. At last I heard a few days ago, there was about a 40% response rate, which isn't terrible, right? It's not bad at all, but we definitely want to make sure that we hear from as many parents as possible. We did not include students in this one as Alan's district did. We had included students in previous surveys about their experience with distance learning. So in terms of satisfaction, you know, I think I couldn't characterize anybody's experience as really being satisfied with distance learning across the spectrum. Students, parents, teachers, everybody really found it lacking, but our disapproval is based on what I've heard anecdotally, tracks really what Long Beach's experience was. Interestingly, we started polling just about the time that we reopened, that we restarted instruction. So about 4 weeks after we closed schools, and the parental and student approval of the district's handling of the shutdown and restart of instruction has actually been very high. So I just want to separate that from their actual experience with the instructional quality of distance learning. In terms of the future, again, we're still waiting for the results of our parental survey, but based on the great deal of input that we have already received directly, you know, parents, it's either about a third, or 40-40 on either end of the spectrum who feel strongly about returning or who feel strongly about not returning. And students, generally speaking, want to return. They have a sense of what they're missing out on. We did get a survey back that was conducted by our teachers union, and they did that entirely on their own. They did consult with the district on the questions and wanted to kind of make sure they were tracking the same options in the same way that the district was looking at. So 18% of our teachers are very concerned about returning to any kind of in-class instruction, and about 7% said that they would not return due to their own health and safety risks. So look, going forward, I can't in good conscience, ask somebody to put their lives on the line for their job. So what I and others on my board have asked for is that those employees, not just teachers, but those employees who actually have high risk categories, be given some kind of flexibility if and when we do return to in-class instruction. That is clearly extraordinarily complex, particularly because we also want to give options to our students, right? Because some of them also have health issues. So we are actually right now looking at a way to match students who cannot or are not willing to return to in-class instruction in the event that we go back full-time or a hybrid approach, to match them with teachers who are also in that category. So incredibly complicated, but we are giving it a shot. Also, my district has a virtual academy already that is K-8. We have one of our continuation schools that offers K through 12 virtual instruction, and our district-sponsored charter school, charter high school, also offers a hybrid and virtual approach. So we have those existing. However, most of the folks who are new to this are not doing homeschool or virtual academy by choice. So we are looking at developing a school-based option, which keeps them attached to their school of attendance, and hopefully at least some of the teachers, if not their actual instructor, but some of the teachers at their school. So that's another thing that's in the works. Let's see, we also have surveys of other employee groups under development. And again, those are surveys that were initiated by the labor groups themselves. So the district is participating, is facilitating those as best as possible. And that kind of input is incredibly helpful to me as a board member, particularly because the experience and the risk differs depending on your job classification. Obviously, our bus drivers and food service workers might feel differently than our instructors or administrators. Fun fact, my district has 7 bargaining groups. So if any of you are complaining about 2 or 3, just wanted to throw that out there for you. Let's see. So again, we don't have the official results from the parent survey, but based on what I've seen so far, the parents who want to stay at home, the primary reason for that is their concern for health and safety. And the parents who want to return, their primary reasons are concerns over the quality of the instruction during distance learning and concerns about the social emotional impact of staying at home. And I want to say that that's an issue that we've heard raised just across the board, really, no matter what people are asking for. It's also an issue that the county health officer raised. So this past Monday, my board had a special meeting with our legal counsel and the county health officer. And in that meeting, she raised this issue that they've seen cases of people actually having mental health breakdowns. And parents have been incredibly candid, even in public meetings, saying, my home is a war zone, using terms like that. So, I mean, not only am I experiencing all of this along with them as a parent, but, parents have been incredibly candid talking about, I'm a healthcare worker and I can't stay home to help my parents. So I'm staying up till 11 to help my younger child, until 1 to help my older child with homework. I mean, it's really, really a situation that I understand is untenable for a lot of people. It's not something that that they can sustain over the long term. Parents are reporting a lot of depression. They're concerned about suicidality. All of those things that are legitimate issues. So sure, we do have that politicized group of folks who are kind of anti-mask, anti-science a little bit, but that's a minority. The majority of the folks who want a return to in-person instruction are for these reasons, about concerns about the quality of instruction and the social emotional impact. And within that, we have a very vocal contingent in support of returning to all sports, of course. But Alan mentioned the National Association of High School Sports. I forget what their name is. They put out some guidance. Shortly after that, the California Interscholastic Federation did. And we have based our plans on those, which, if you haven't followed them closely, they suggest different things for different sports. And at this point, They have not allowed instruction. They have not allowed competition between schools. And frankly, that may be one of the very last things. I think that's like phase 4. So right now, kids in specific sports are being able to do modified practices, and there are things like, one student can't toss a ball to another, right? You have to just use your own equipment. Nobody can touch anything that somebody else touches. You have to maintain your distance. It's actually pretty interesting and very detailed for things like weightlifting. You can't have someone stand over somebody else's head because I guess they're too close, so things of that nature. We also have a very vocal contingent for the visual and performing arts. This actually began when folks started hearing about the budget troubles that districts were facing. They were concerned that the visual and performing arts might be hurt by that. And later on, they learned about things like the risk of transmission during choir practice, things of that nature. So they remain engaged. Some of that has died down now that they think that instrumental music can go forward, things of that nature. But we have a very vocal contingent for that issue. We have not conducted anything that's like a community forum, and I don't believe that there are any plans in the works. But at our last meeting on Monday, the board did ask for the superintendent to conduct additional parent outreach to groups like his superintendent's advisory council, things like that. Our district began the closure of schools and the planning for distance learning with about 12 different task force groups, and I think we are down to about 8. Those are the same 8 with which we're operating now. They do track, generally speaking, the issues that the ones in Alan's district are talking about. Thank you so much, Julie, for reminding us all about translation. Much appreciated. This is an opportunity to really put our commitment to equity in practice and to make sure that we don't widen the gulfs that we know that already exist for folks. So I will definitely be taking that back to my district. Some of the things Alan mentioned, PPE protocols, there is just so much yet to be developed here. I think about a lot of our community advocates, our advocates for Black students in particular, that said that sadly, the closure of our schools has meant a respite for a lot of our students from the discipline practices that disproportionately affected Black students. So I'm thinking when we go back, is the need to wear a mask going to become yet another possible infraction and possible point of disproportionate application of discipline? So those are all things that we need to think through. I know my district has a discipline matrix, and we're going to have to make sure that we know how we adapt it for this new situation. My advice from another district, from another partner in this, who has yet to develop an answer, and our answer is going to be different for every district about how to resume instruction in the fall, is to make sure that you work closely with your legal counsel and to make sure that you work closely with your county health officer. The budget bill that will be passed either Friday or Monday actually includes some language that's a little bit troubling. The California School Boards Association has been issuing some communications about it, but it seems to try to push school districts back into in-class instruction. It actually says something like you can only offer distance instruction under an order or guidance from your county health officer. And most county health officers really don't want to be in the position of having that responsibility. So I think I'm tremendously grateful to the one that we work with, but my experience has been that nobody really wants to be the one that has the burden on their shoulders and to take the wrath of parents who are not satisfied with the decision. So most of the county health officer guidance I've seen really is much more in the gray areas. It falls short of an order. It falls short even of clear guidance. They are much more comfortable advising on the plans that the district is putting together. So what that does is it puts districts in a situation where they may feel that they are forced to open because they don't have clear guidance from their health officer, or their health officer is not willing to provide that level of clarity. So just a heads up that that's yet another thing that we will have to contend with. And that's and that's in the budget bills. I'm sorry, I don't have the budget bill number right now, but I will look that up and put it in the comments. I don't want to give you the wrong one. I think it's SB 98, but I will verify. So we are also contending with transportation issues. A couple of the issues that I honestly just can't wrap my mind around yet, how we will do this with social distancing, is transportation. You know, if we do a hybrid approach that requires 2 different sets of students to come to school in one day, we, like most, if not all of you, are one of those districts affected by the shortage of bus drivers. We already were failing to provide transportation as mandated to some of our special education students just because we could not hire enough bus drivers. Sanitation of classrooms is another area where I just don't understand. I've seen some schedules that other districts have put together where they say, you know, we're going to have a morning track starting at 7:30 in the morning, which is really early, a morning track and an afternoon track, and custodians are going to come by and sanitize all of the classrooms somehow in that 1 hour period. And I have a lot of questions about that. I don't know that the products we're using will work that quickly. I don't know that one person, or most of the elementary schools will only have one custodian, can physically do that. So that's a concern. Go ahead.
Just a comment there. That's a a lot of stuff there, but that's a big one. Those are 2 big areas that we're focusing on, because as it relates to transportation, I know every district's a little different in the population that you're transporting, but when you look at the lack of equipment and the lack of drivers that everybody's struggling with, we're really coming to a conclusion that it's going to be very, very hard for us to transport all of the same students that we're doing and still, and this is a caveat, and still offer the same type of program. So we are exploring options of, do we create alternative bell schedule programs at school sites so that we can then double or triple up off of the existing equipment we have. That's one option. But it's a very complicated question, because especially as it relates to like screening of students before they get on a bus. Like, what do you do if a student screens out? Do you just drive away and leave that student on the side of the road? Do you screen them and then place them in a different part of the bus? What do you do when they actually get to the school? Do you have the protocols in place to deal with potentially ill students that arrive at school ill? There's just a host of concerns and problems that come from transportation. And I think that's going to be one of the 2, and you hit on both of them, most complicated components of this. The second one is that disinfection component. And literally yesterday, I had this conversation where I said it's physically impossible with the 5 custodians I have at a middle school, and I'm fortunate in my larger middle schools, I'll have as many as 5 people. Even if I had them doing nothing but disinfection, I can't do it in the time frame you're allowing me. It's impossible. And then secondly, do I want to expose those children to disinfected tables and desks that are literally wet with disinfectant because we've just went through and wiped it down? And do we want to do that multiple times throughout the day, 180 days a year? Is that really what we want to do? So there's a lot of concerns there, as I mentioned when I started talking about balancing perception and capabilities with how we're communicating to what we're doing related to our health and safety requirements in schools. It's going to be extremely complicated, and unfortunately, not everyone's going to be satisfied with what we come up with, and we just have to come up with a good solid plan and move forward with them. So it's going to be very challenging. I wanted to respond really quick too about a question that popped up on the chat. I didn't include data here, but we did survey our teachers as well. We had an overwhelming response from our teachers. Somewhere around 87% of our teachers responded to our survey and provided some very interesting data. And overwhelmingly, they all want to come back to school. But overwhelmingly, they're all concerned about their own personal safety as it relates to being exposed to little bodies every day, face-to-face contact. So the health and safety issues are a concern for teachers. So going back to what I was saying, really, how do we deal with that communication so that those folks that we're inviting back into our school sites feel safe to be there is going to be a big, big challenge for us.
Yeah, Alan, Nancy, thank you. That's, wow, lots of information. I'm hoping you guys are going to stay on, and maybe as our other presenters come along, you can actually kind of interject there as well and comparing again with what they're doing with you doing. But thank you so much. Again, great ideas to think of. And by the way, Palm Springs, we have our first meeting tonight, open forum meeting with the public and add in. And then tomorrow night, we're doing one in Spanish. And so it'll be completely in Spanish. That way, in our area, that's predominant language other than English. And so they're able to interact and share in where they're most comfortable with. And so we find that's going to, hopefully that's going to work well. If we have any other languages that will request it, we'll do our best to accommodate it in an open forum as well and share the other ones. So, all right, great. Thank you all. Next up, we have Planning Schools and COVID World Learning and New Configurations. We have Aldo Ramirez with San Bernardino City Unified School District and Tom Pace, also with San Bernardino City Unified School District and a CASH board member. Good morning, Aldo and Tom. How are you guys doing?
Good morning. Good morning. Doing well. Thank you for the invitation.
Great. Great to have you on.
We are fantastic and excited to be here. You want to start off there, Aldo?
I'll go ahead and get started, team. I will apologize. I do have an 11 o'clock, so I'll have to jump off, but Tom can carry you the rest of the way through. Much of what has been shared by our other two school districts is on our radar. It's been part of our discussions. Much of the approach in terms of surveying and in terms of meeting with our community virtually and facing those challenges has been a part of our experience. Next slide, please. So really what we want to do today is quickly go over the guidelines that we have been able to develop for physically distanced school for our district. We want to very briefly share the results of the employee and family feedback, which is very similar to what has already been shared. We won't spend too much time on that. And then lastly, just talk a little bit about the reopening models that we have provided, recommendations to our board and with sample schedules. Obviously, all of this with the caveat that it could change at a whim because it is changing constantly. Next slide, please. Let's go ahead and go to the next slide. So our guiding principles in this work so far have been to keep health and safety at the forefront of everything that we're doing. We've assembled a team of over 100 individuals. We call our PDS team, our physically distant schooling team, who before guidance was out, started researching and really trying to understand what we would face as we started to populate schools again in any kind of a way, shape, or form. As guidance started coming out, this team has ensured that their findings are in line with federal, state, and county guidance. And as we know, they change frequently. So the team members are keeping up with those changes and incorporating them into the guidance documentations. Our ultimate desire is to provide a high quality learning experience for all and to provide safe and accessible working conditions. Next slide, please. So we developed a timeline starting May 5th for doing this work. As you can see, we're at the beginning stages of this timeline implementation, which is finalizing the guidelines and then moving into publicly sharing those guidelines so that we can start preparing our facilities, training our folks, and communicating to the public. Next slide, please. I'll go ahead and let Tom jump in. We have outlined a 6-step plan to try to get it ready as we can for our start of the school year.
And typically in architecture, you talk about form follows function. And I think early on, we realized that we're going to have to look at this a little differently, that the form will have to be created based off of guidelines from others, and the functionality of our campuses will have to follow the form. And I think that's been one of our driving principles in all of this. And so we came up with 6 principles or 6 steps to kind of guide us through the process. So we determine our prerequisites and end, I think, with the most important aspect, communication, training, and policy. That no matter what cleaning products we put into our classrooms, no matter how we physically structure our classrooms, it won't be useful unless it's properly communicated, unless there are policies that support that communication and training. Next slide. One of the things that we realized early on is that we have to take the approach in San Bernardino of the responsibility of the child from the time they leave their house to the time they return to their house. And so that is screening at bus stops, that is providing guidance for carpooling, preparing your child for school. So a lot of our screening and monitoring process revolves around looking and providing guidance to the child from the time they wake up in the morning to the time they return home. Next slide. After that, we looked at what are the physical component of our campuses will look like. Busing is a big component. I completely agree with Alan. It's one of the most challenging aspects to physically distance schools. We bus close to 10,000 of our students on a daily basis. How do you run buses at a quarter capacity? How do you have a screening process that the bus driver will largely be responsible for? What happens when you encounter a child who potentially is exhibiting symptoms of COVID-19? I have a young son, and just trying to get him to use a face mask consistently has been a challenge. What happens if a child refuses to wear their mask? Things like that. Limiting visitors and volunteers, seeking virtual activities instead of large group settings are going to be key. I think one of the things we've been talking about lately that coincides with what Tom Duffy said, our facility use. We are currently restricting all facility use events. The complexities of inviting outsiders into your campuses, ensuring that they have followed your processes, that things have been sanitized, is a real challenge. So for the time being and for the foreseeable future, we are limiting all of our facility use requests. Next slide. Hygiene and cleaning routines. I think this is one of the biggest challenges operationally for school districts. And I know that our M&O department has been working very hard in trying to look at how they can support the different schedules, the proposed schedules coming from our ed side. One of the things that they've looked at is the use of electrostatic sprayer machines that can cut down on the labor cost of sanitizing so that they can turn around classrooms quicker, so that they can be put back into reuse, or the MU rooms for lunches. Next slide. And then lastly, what does a communication training and policy look like? We're going to be looking at doing websites where we put up videos for how to wash your hands properly, what is required when you approach one of our campuses. We have to provide our staff, students, and families training in every one of the areas we just talked about. Next slide. Aldo, you want to go through the different reopening options that we've looked at?
Absolutely. So we actually think that in order to meet all the guidelines put out by our county health office, we only have two options. The first option is to do a virtual option and distance learning option for those families and students that and staff that can't come back because of their situations. The other option is a blended model where we bring in students in groups, small groups, to the campus, and really those are the two things we're looking at right now in order to meet the county guidelines. Next slide, please.
And Aldo, I think one of the things that I've enjoyed listening to you talk about is doing a soft opening, so that it's not everyone returned to school, the start of school, having a soft opening, get people accustomed to what the recommendations will be, the new life, get them trained in those areas, and then bring back children once that soft opening has proven to be successful.
Absolutely, and I'll talk a little bit more about that in the last slide. What we provided here for our board is a sample schedule of what the blended model could look like. We all know what a virtual model looks like. It's what we've been doing. Obviously, we'll be upgrading it to try to make it better based on what we learned from the closure. And so the blended model is a bit of a difficult conversation to have. There's many options out there. When we looked at all of the parameters and all of the restrictions, the model that we put forth as a recommendation to our board is a model where we divide our students in half. This is an elementary sample schedule of what it might look like. So we would have two groups, an A group and a B group. A would come Tuesday and Thursday. We decided to bring them in for a half day. It solves a lot of the cleaning issues, a lot of the different requirements, exposure to chemicals, etc. And they come, like I said, Tuesday through Thursday. In the afternoons, the B group receives distance learning with the teachers. And then on Wednesday and Thursday, the B group comes in the morning and the A group receives computerized instruction in the afternoon. This allows for every student to have a touch point every day, and it resolves a lot of the issues with disinfecting and capacity there. Next slide, please.
Hey, Aldo, real quick. For the non-educators of the group like myself, can you explain real quick what synchronous learning means?
So synchronous learning is virtual learning on the computer with the teacher and students on at the same time, receiving instruction and interaction.
And so the opposite of that would be asynchronous learning, where teachers are providing assignments online, but not necessarily having the continuous face-to-face instruction, correct?
Correct. Thank you, Tom, for the clarity. This is a sample secondary schedule. Really the only difference, secondary is much more complicated, but really the only difference in this schedule is that instead of the A group coming in Tuesday, Thursday, and the B group coming in Thursday, Friday, Wednesday, Friday, they come in 2 days in a row. So A group Tuesday, Wednesday, and B group Thursday, Friday. And Mondays are usually our minimum days. Those would be virtual days and reserved for staff development for staff across the board. Next slide, please. So as Tom mentioned, our recommendation is that we actually start school virtually with all students on August 3rd. Our start date is really fast. And so in order to prepare and be fully ready for when students come back on campus and staff come back on campus, our recommendation is a distance model with a soft opening. The soft opening is focused on bringing in students so that they can meet their new teachers, so that they can start learning the routines that they'll be encountering when they go into the blended model, so that they'll, and also bringing in students who might need additional support, who might not be connecting online for additional touch points. We set our blended learning recommendation for the end of September, obviously based on what is going on at the state and local level in terms of guidance. And always having a distance learning option for those families who need it or are interested in it.
And I think
Next
one of
slide.
the things, although that we recognize too, is the need for a mitigation plan approved by the board. I know many of you have seen the CSBA sample. I think Nancy hit on that a little bit, that I think for one of the best practices would be having a mitigation plan, reviewing that with legal counsel, making changes where you see fit. One of the things I know that was not covered in the CSBA sample is the facility use recommendation. So I know that Marty's provided some guidance there, but I would recommend highly taking a look at the CSBA sample for the mitigation plans.
Absolutely. And I apologize, team, but I'll have to log off in a minute and join another conversation. But thank you so much for the opportunity.
Next slide. Did we? There we go. And I think that pretty much wraps up what we were going to share with you today on what we're doing in San Bernardino. I think one of the highlights for us, although it's very complex work and that we haven't answered a lot of questions, is we've tried to make this a collaborative approach with our collective bargaining units. We have 4 of them, with our community, with our students, and with our staff, and recognizing that each one of those groups has differing and opposing opinions on how to handle COVID. And I think that's one of the greatest challenges, is trying to get all groups to agree on a basic strategy. I think at times it's herding cats. It's trying to get everyone trying to move in the right direction when there is an unknown direction to move. And lastly, I just wanted to say to Alan, as a young man, it was always on my bucket list to be a part of a task force. I don't know why. I just thought as a kid that the name task force was really cool. And to see that you're on a task force, you have checked off something I haven't on my bucket list. So congratulations for being on a task force.
Tom, if it'll help, I can make you a member of our task force.
I would feel very grateful to be a part of your task force, Alan. I could check that off my list.
Yeah, I will. I'll send you over a little certificate, you know. So.
And if I get a badge, that'd be even better.
Yeah, yeah. We do want those stinking badges. So, Tom and Alan, while you're on here, a couple questions have kind of come up. How are you handling the after-school program? And I would say there are a couple there, like your high school. Many times there are clubs. Dan Minner was mentioning the architect and construction club that several high schools have. And then we have the after-school childcare in our district, ACES or Think Together. What are you guys seeing with that, and how are you seeing the use?
I'd say for our community, childcare is going to be a significant issue and has been raised as a significant issue. And I think that our after-school program is called CAPS. Our CAPS program will be in place. It's just how to do it in a socially distanced environment. They typically use things like MU rooms, large spaces, and that kind of goes against the recommendations that we're giving our schools. So the after-school programs, the childcare, and I would say even childcare for our staff has been an issue. What do they do with the kids that they have themselves that are they may need to bring back with them? So it's childcare is a ongoing discussion and a very difficult one.
Yeah,
we recognize the need for it, but there aren't any good solutions.
Yeah, in Long Beach, we've actually really materially way been addressing that. So we began offering childcare for our district staff that were being required to come to work in the months of April and throughout May. I think we just recently stopped it. I think on the 12th of June was when we discontinued that program. So we have a little bit of a test bed. I think it was 12 sites that we offered childcare for district staff. So what we're doing as we move forward is we're collaborating with those folks in our childcare division, because they adopted a whole series of protocols that included PPE, the use of PPE, the training for teachers to be able to use things like disinfectant, the frequency that the teacher's involvement of the disinfecting process was going to be involved, was going to include. So what we're doing now is we actually have those folks on our teams that we're collaborating on what worked, what didn't work, how successful were various things that they did in the childcare, because for 2 reasons. We're starting up another childcare program for the community by the middle of July, and then obviously that will help us to work towards our full opening of school this coming fall. But it has been something we've been looking at. It has been something we're using, and we're looking to use their experiences to help us as we go forward.
I think at the high school level, the high school experience for students is the most important part about high school, and the clubs and the sports are the reasons that kids want to go to high school. The extracurricular activities makes the high school experience. And how to blend COVID restrictions in to allow for that high school experience. I don't know if any of you experienced some of the pain we went through with trying to just deal with graduation. We're going to have to provide that experience while merging it with all of the different requirements in the COVID world.
Yeah, and I think we're going to end up where we're going to end up, and I think Nancy touched on it just a little bit, is it's really going to be a case-by-case scenario. Certain after-school activities can easily be accomplished with social distancing and the protocols that we put in place. Other types of activities are going to be very, very difficult. The one that always comes to mind with me is wrestling. It's really hard to perform wrestling socially distant, right? Being a high school wrestler back in the day, you're very, very close with these individuals that you're wrestling. And I don't know how that program is going to be able to move forward with some of the protocols. Other types of sports, band, we could spread out a little bit with band members, and we can still possibly use some of the fields to do some of those areas. So there's going to be various different accommodations that'll need to be done.
Yeah, I see it. The high school is going to be challenging. I mean, so many from cheerleading to dance to volleyball and so many of those items, it's
winter formals, proms, it's all of the activities that kids come to expect to be a part of their high school experience that you're telling them now that you may not be able to do or will be done differently. I think that is causing a lot at that age level.
And I think that speaks to that social emotional component that I spoke about earlier, about how kids miss that interaction with their peers. They miss that component to school, because I think I know school has more than just the educational component. It has that social component as well. And when students have lost that, they've felt a material loss moving forward.
I know I love my two daughters greatly, but I know they don't go to school for the educational lessons that they receive on a daily basis.
Tom, I'm sure you're misunderstanding them. I'm sure they do.
Oh no, I'm not misunderstanding them. They are quite clear on that. They don't. If they could go to school and not have a teacher talk to them, they'd appreciate it.
All right, well, let's go ahead and move on. And again, if you guys will stay around and pop on and to add to a little bit, we have Tova Corman coming up, and Tova's going to share San Marcos Unified School District's plan for reopening. Hey, Tova, good morning. How are you doing? Oh, and by the way, Tova's a CASH board member as well.
Hi, Julie. Hi, everybody out there in cyberspace. Welcome. Next slide, please. What I'm going to be doing today, because I knew that Tom Pace and Alan and Nancy were going to be on, and what I wanted to do is I actually did a survey of I live in North County, San Diego, and we're a tight-knit little group of 11 districts that really connect once a month to talk about issues. And ever since COVID started, we started meeting every 2 weeks to really just see what other districts, and they're all executive directors of facilities and/or maintenance. And we get together now every 2 weeks to talk about what each of us are doing in each of our school districts, to find out what, the good, the bad, the other ideas. One of our school districts, for example, is instead of putting in sneeze guards, they opted to buy everybody a face mask, so they don't have to worry about that. And all of our school districts have done surveys. Ours just got published today, and I could share those results on the 3 models. Could you get to the next slide for me, please? So what I'm going to be talking about is not only SMUSD, San Marcos, but all of these 11 districts that I did the survey. Most often, each of the districts is working with a design brainstorming team of some sort. And as Tom and Alan both shared, and in other districts have shared in other presentations, is that, that we're all in process, and very few districts have absolutely board approved, said this is what we're doing for next year. So to honor those districts who are still going through the process and still have to either go to the community or go to their board or get it approved, what I'm going to be doing is just talking about in general what Northern San Diego County is looking at. Number one, our goal of all districts is to continue to provide a high quality education that focuses on both safety and social emotional health. And you could see all my little images. So we want to make sure that all the safety includes social distancing, PPE, as well as all the items that Tom and Alan discussed: athletics, busing, food services, transportation, and then really looking at what this impact has on our children. And even teachers and parents and so on. So we want to make sure that, as my little happy scale goes, is where are we on the happy scale? And how do we make sure that those kids who are thriving in a virtual environment are getting along, and those who are not thriving, how do we support them? So every school district that I've talked to knows that their number one goal is to educate our kids. And now we have these two new components that we really need to focus on, which is the safety and social-emotional health. Our survey, since we're all sharing the interest of surveys, was a little bit different. We have 21,000 students, and we surveyed almost 8,500 of those. We did parents, students, and staff. And basically, we had 3 types of questions on preferences, and that was a traditional model, so everybody goes back to school full time. And those range from between staff, parents, and students, 50% to 60%. And a hybrid model went from 24% to 30% approval. And then virtual model, which was 15 to 20%. So some students will be staying home, which will help with our capacities across the districts. And I thought that was very interesting as well, because I did see in other school districts that they were up to 70% of saying they'd like to go back to traditional models. Sam, could you do the next slide, please? So in talking with my facility group and talking with my own school district and talking, these are the considerations that we have with, loading schools. I don't want to go over everything, as everybody has already kind of talked about it, but we have several task forces that are going into it. We have, ones that are focusing on really the social emotional health. We're having a task force that is going over mostly things like logistics, providing water, providing masks, providing thermometers, transportation, food services, and that nature. And then we have groups of folks that are focused on how to get kids back in schools, principals and folks that actually do the educating, and then how that other groups that focus on how we actually provide the curriculum. And whether it is the stay-at-home virtual model, what kind of program does that look at? So all of those are still in processes. And it sounded like to my local school districts that this is, a topic that is very near and dear to everybody's heart, the communities, the board members, our superintendents, cabinets, teachers, principals, parents. And we're going to hear from some parents, from some cash dads later on, which will be interesting. But, these are our concerns. How do we get kids in and out of school, whether it's picking up, dropping off by parents or buses? How do we make sure those children who get to school, and teachers and administrators, get to school and know that they are healthy and that they are safe? And what happens when they do come on campus and they do show signs of COVID? Do we have a place for them to go? And do we have a protocol on how to make sure that they do not interact, or they do not, spread the virus themselves? And then one of the things that we haven't been talking much about is books and supplies. So one of the things that is of concern is, do we have enough textbooks, and do we have enough supplies as far as whiteboard markers? So every child who's in a classroom has their own box of supplies. Is that how it's going to look, where they can go up and go to the whiteboard because of the spacing requirements, and go up and use their own marker and bring that marker back, so there's no sharing? How do we make sure that there's a book, because sterilizing a book obviously isn't the easiest thing to do. So how do we make sure that every kid has what they need to learn when they are in school? And then, of course, the number one issue is, how do we clean? How do we make sure in between classes, in between programs, and in between childcare is actually being taken care of? And like other folks, we have been looking into foggers, and we have purchased some and other things. But one of the things, if you may or may not know, is a fogger can disinfect a room very quickly, some under 10 seconds, and which is great, but it doesn't mean that the room is clean. It means the room is disinfected. So those rooms will still need to be cleaned by custodial staff in the regular manner on a daily basis, as they would if we were full blown without COVID. So let's go to the next slide, Sam. So I met with 11 North County San Diego school districts, anticipating their classroom configurations. And the reason why I'm talking about these school districts in general, again, is because for two reasons. 95, I think even 100% of these have not been approved by the board, whether it's set in stone and not approved, or whether it's still in the works, is differing. And in order to make sure that that they have their ability to continue their process, whether or not they have all the input they need. And then the second reason is the San Diego County actually put out a recommendation that they recommend about 18 students per classroom, which is about 45 to 50 square foot per classroom, depending on a standard size non-kinder, non-science classroom. So if we change, and so a lot of the school districts are looking at 18 students per classroom, and that may clash with what they had already chosen previously. So that being said, so there, as you can see in this table, there's a variety of what the school districts are looking for. So we have one school district. Oh, and our, let me explain San Diego North County. We have elementary school districts, high school districts, and unified school districts. So we have all three different types of school districts in this area. So one school district has determined that 30 square foot per student is sufficient, which is almost as tight as you could possibly get, but every student will be wearing a mask at all times during the class day. So that equates to about 20 to 30 per classroom. And I may note that they do have a little bit larger classrooms than a standard size. Theirs are about 950 to 100 after you take out the casework. There's one school district that's looking at about 50 to 60, and that's about 14 to 70 students per classroom. So as you can see, the difference between the two is great, where you have almost half capacity, full capacity at one and half capacity at the other. And then we have 4 school districts that are looking at 70 square foot, which is about 12 students per classroom. And that seems to be in the North County the highest recommended, except I did hear this morning and last night after I put out one last email, is they are thinking about changing to the county's 18 students per classroom. So this is changing every day in many school districts. And then we have one unified school district that is going to 80 students. So they're only going to have about a third capacity in their standard classrooms, which is going to, limit the number of students. And maybe they have 3 tracks instead of 2, where they're looking at, 15 to 18 students per classroom, where they could have at least half capacity. And then we have 2 school districts that just stated, we're just going half capacity. So if a class is normally 30 kids per class, it's going to be 15. So that's the way that they've decided to do it. A lot of school districts are looking at how it looks in the classroom. And as we all know, it's every school, unless you're a particular school district that I know of that has multiplied the same school and cookie cuttered it across several school sites, over 10, I believe. A lot of the schools are not the same. We have 2 schools that have the same footprint, but no other schools are the same exact footprints. So every school and every classroom will be a little bit different. The only thing we can count on being the same are portables. And then we have 2 districts that are undecided. And that's because they're still going back between the recommendations. Last week, one of the recommendations that was floating around, but I can confirm it, was 112 square foot per student, which by this accounting is about 5 to 6 kids per classroom, which would be almost unsustainable. So I just wanted to show a couple of pictures of some of my colleagues' workspaces. Can you please show the next slide? Okay, so the reason I like this picture, I have many examples, is this is an elementary school district. And as you can see, those desks are like from the 70s or something. And so they're working with what they're working with. So this is a school district that's attempting to go to 28 students per classroom, and they have 1,000 square feet per classroom. So if you notice on the left side, the back by that large TV, and then over in the corner by the bookshelves where it says discover and read, those classroom tables are not necessarily facing the front of the classroom because their backs would be against the wall. So they are configured in different ways. So once they laid this plan out, they're looking at how this physically works. And so I encourage everybody to think about how it works for their own school and maybe adapt each classroom. So say if this classroom fit 28 students, they might consider reducing this by maybe 4 or 5 or whatever they see fit by the shape of each classroom. Can we go to the next slide? So this is a high school district. And this one is interesting because they have the same type of desks a lot of high schools have. This is 70 square foot per student. And these are the type of desks that we have at our high school. And as you can see, that desk that's all the way down at the bottom, that desk is almost in the doorway. And then the other door on the other side to the workroom, as you can see where the gentleman is pointing, there is a desk also against the door. So we have to consider things like walking out of the classrooms. How does that student have to get up every time? Or can we adjust where that student sits? So it is going to get tricky, and I do encourage in going out and testing each school to see how your configuration works. We were going to be going out on Monday, but I actually got a COVID test myself, and I'm waiting results in order to do these. Yeah, we have these configurations that we want to look at and to see what we're using and what each furniture at every school. Like I showed in the last picture, you know, they have very old untraditional desks. And what I've seen in our middle schools is we have 2-person tables. And in our elementary school, we have round circle tables. So it's really something to consider because every one of our schools has different furniture. And even one of my local school districts who has new furniture for every school in their district, they actually let the principals pick what types of furniture for their school. So even though they have all brand new furniture, none of the furniture in every school looks similar. So it's just some of the considerations I'd like to bring to the table today. And if there's any questions, I'm here till the end.
Tova, just a quick comment, because this is fantastic, first of all. And I highly recommend that everybody really look at this. We're looking at this very, very closely. We have teams in our facility side that are actually going out, and we're looking at various different configurations of classrooms. It's going to be very hard because we have various different schools built over different eras. But our plan is to come up with a guidebook or some resources for teachers that give various different configurations that allow that teacher some of that flexibility and some guidelines. As I talked about, one of our task force is the classroom environment, where we're going to be coming up with some of these very same examples. But one of the byproducts of this that we're really struggling with is what to do with all that stuff. I guarantee you, whoever that teacher is that's in this classroom, it did not look sterile like this previously. So there's a lot of stuff that's going to come out of this classroom. What are you going to do with it? Because as we know, teachers are very possessive over their stuff. And
Well, and one of the, that's absolutely correct. And one of the things I thought was interesting is about a month ago, we were talking about using the furniture to create that space in between students. And pushing it in certain areas to create spaces. Okay, so then you'd leave the majority and you'd stack certain things in certain areas. And then the county just came out with a checklist of reopening and guidelines. And in that checklist said to remove all unused furniture. And so I'm not certain about other counties and whether our county will be changing that direction, but it was in their checklist to remove all furniture. And again, that has come up, especially for maintenance and facilities, is where does it go? And
yeah,
and we don't want to ruin, whether it's new furniture, old furniture, 5-year-old furniture, it's valuable and we need to make sure that we protect it. And how do we protect it in MPRs and things of that nature when they're being used for classrooms? So that's one of our big challenges as well.
Yeah, we've had a very vocal group of teachers that have their biggest concern, because again, I do respect the fact that teachers have had to beg, borrow, and steal to get what they have. And so now we're actually telling them to get rid of it. They want it back when all this is over, whatever that means. And so we're really spending a lot of time on what do we do with this stuff and how do we ensure that we can get some of these things back to the teachers once we return to some semblance of normal.
Alan, my recommendation yesterday was the first step before, because we've gone out and played around with model classrooms, a 30 by 32 and a 24 by 40. But one of the first things I told yesterday that we have to do immediately is send out tags. We need to have every school tag their furniture now in the front where the kids can't pick it off, and tag that area so that if anything gets moved out, we know where it's supposed to go. And our principals are a little possessory as well. They don't want the furniture moved off their campus. That's the problem. They want to be able to store that furniture on campus for the ease of going back in. And so that's going to be a little challenging. We were talking about that yesterday as well. But one thing I want to point out here, in making sure your social distance, and I think sometimes they confuse this, it's 6 feet between people. And sometimes they use the word desk or chair. It really makes a difference, because if your desks are 6 feet apart, your students are 8 feet apart. So if students are 6 feet apart, and that's what I'm going with, that means that your desks are about 4.5 feet apart. And that actually gets you an extra row, about 4 more kids in a classroom. And in playing around with the shapes of the classrooms, actually moving furniture in it, we found you can actually fit more desks in a 30 by 32 than a 24 by 40, because even though they're the same square footage, the configuration and how the rows line up.
Yes. Yeah, some of the numbers that Tova shared, we looked very closely at those. We went around and did various different studies at different types of schools. The number we landed on was 46 square feet per student is what we need. And that does allow for what Julie had said, body to body spacing, not furniture to furniture spacing, right?
Right. And sometimes I think they misspeak when they say desk 6 feet apart. No, it's student 6 feet apart.
And that is approximately,
go ahead.
Correct me if I'm wrong, that is approximately 17 to 19 per classroom, correct?
Yes, exactly.
Depending on the casework and configuration.
300, yes. So,
yeah, so that's it.
The other quick comment, you mentioned the first thing that you did, Julie, but the first thing we did is I provided a roll-off rubbish container for every school site, and we conveniently placed it.
Oh, you're a mean man, Alan. That's a
location of every school site to encourage the purging, and we had a lot of success with that, getting things out of classrooms that are unneeded. So
similar to construction, that's a great idea.
Roll-off containers and said, "There you go, pitch it."
Well, it is going to be an issue we do have, and I'm asking right now for a survey from all of our principals, that we do have classrooms that have tables, group tables, because they were encouraging group learning. And those just don't work with Riverside County's guidelines, which is students 6 feet apart and facing forward, right? And so the tables really don't allow that spacing. So all those need to come out, and then we need to put desks in those classrooms. And then you've got your issue of floor time. So a lot of times for your kinder and maybe your first grade, you do a little bit of floor time, you're working colors or sitting. That how you do that, and have a desk or something for the kinder to sit in as well. And maybe our kinders aren't going to have desks this year. Maybe it is going to be all floor time. So those are a few things we're still working out. And yes, the soft seating in the back, the little reading corner that they have sometimes that they could go in a classroom, that's just not going to be there this year in order to have more desks in the classroom.
One you have to consider, Julie, is when you do have desks 4.5 feet apart and children 6 feet apart, when they have to get up to leave the classroom, they have to wear their mask when they're in those bubbles. So depending on the age group, you may have issues with them putting on their masks, and may have to consider that they have a little extra spacing with buffer zone that they could walk through. And you may have to tape the floor and things of that and tell them where to walk, because if you're counting on students to put on a mask when they're 8, 9 years old, when they're walking between, it may happen once or twice, but it may not happen every time. So
well, that's what we were working with as well, as a path of travel. And another thing we talked about with the principals is once we have the students assigned to seats, they'll have to line up outside the classroom, and they'll line up in how they're going to walk to those seats. And, you know, after the first day or two, the kids will get that. And so that they're lining up and going in procession, so people aren't moving all around trying to get to that seat.
exactly.
So it's going to be a lot more classroom management. We're putting, again, even more burden on our teachers in trying to get our school classrooms back open. Anyway, Tova, all great information. Thank you so much.
Thank you. I'll be on the seminar until the end of it if anybody has any.
Great. Thank you.
Thank you.
All right, next slide. We've got our cross-functional innovation design team with Bianca Barkin for Santa Ana Unified and Jeremy Kogan, also Santa Ana Unified. Well, we're still morning, so good morning to both of you.
Thank you, Julie. I'll get us started here, and I think Bianca's coming on screen. There we are. So I'm Jeremy Kogan. I'm Director of Facilities Planning for Santa Ana Unified. I'm joined by Bianca Barkin, our Assistant Superintendent of K-12 Teaching and Learning. Hi, Bianca.
Hi, good morning, or good afternoon, everyone, sorry.
That's right, almost there.
Almost there.
So, our presentation today is going to be a little bit different maybe than the previous ones. We wanted to share some actual presentation slides that went out to our community, to our board over the past couple of weeks, sort of outlining our proposed reopening plan to the community. I'm sure a lot of viewers today are working on similar materials for districts. And for anything like me, I always appreciate seeing some examples for a point of comparison. The other thing we're going to cover a lot is process. How did we develop a group to address a lot of the questions that are coming up in today's panel? So I think that probably one of the first things we did, like many, is we asked a lot of those hard questions. And then really the issue came down to, what is our brain trust that is going to start to actually put in the deep dive answers to these? So let's go ahead and get started with the next slide. And actually we can go one more slide. So first I'll share that our board has not yet adopted a final plan. As Julie said at the start of today's webinar, our district as well, we're still adjusting direction based on that input from our board. We just had a meeting on Tuesday of this week. Tom said earlier, he as a kid wanted to be a member of a task force. We've got a term that I'm curious how kids today would respond to it. We call it the innovation design team. And I'll have to ask my 7-year-old son if he likes innovation design team better or worse than task force. But let's talk a little bit about why we kind of created this team. First, on the facility side, we did a deep dive into reopening in early May. And our first start was to assess classrooms for social distancing, sort of the same way that the discussion around Tova's presentation covered. What does a classroom look like when you tape out those 6-foot social distancing areas between students? how many students fit, and what does that make available in terms of capacity. The number we arrived on was about 48 square feet, pretty close to, I think, what Alan mentioned in Long Beach. And when you think about it, that's like a 3-foot space in front of you, a 3-foot space behind you, and about 4 feet on each side, making for some circulation space. Those are bubbles that don't intersect, right? Those are bubbles that are independent of one another. And that covers about 80% of a 960 square foot classroom. So you can do the math. 960 times 80% leaves you with about 768 square feet. And that's about 16 occupants or so, depending on the exact setup of the room. So that's going to vary across the district, but that's just sort of one small piece of this puzzle, right? The facilities piece. And we started asking all these questions that were way beyond that facilities piece, and saying, okay, how do we bring in different departments across the district? We need a way to put this all together. And we want an approach that's not just a pandemic response, but we want something that looks at long-term innovation, because the crisis that we all had in March produced these really incredible solutions across the district, ideas that no one had ever thought possible. And how do we protect and preserve those great ideas and include that in the planning for reopening? So there's a little bit of a clue there in terms of why we call it the innovation design team. It's not just about reopening, it's not just about one element of it, but as you see here, an extraordinary learning environment for all students in the district. So I will turn it to Bianca, and she can take us through the next part.
Okay, perfect. Thank you so much, Jeremy. Next slide, please. So let's talk a little bit about our process. Under the direction and guidance of the Board of Education, the Superintendent and Executive Cabinet, a cross-functional design team was created, as Jeremy said, called SAUSD's Innovation Design Team, to help develop a comprehensive plan for SAUSD's reopening in the fall. So what we were tasked to do is to elicit stakeholder input and feedback, identify critical areas of need. We were tasked with action planning, providing recommendations, and developing systems, both logistical and instructional. And as Jeremy said, for the purpose of designing extraordinary and equitable learning for all students in SAUSD. So through periods of intense planning and design, which we call design sprints, we identified 6 areas, target areas that needed to be addressed in our plan. Target area number 1, health, safety, and basic needs. Target area number 2, flexible and innovative design. Target area number 3, reimagining student learning. Target area number 4, wellness. Target area number 5, professional learning and accountability. And target area number 6, stakeholder engagement. Through another series of design sprints, specific recommendations were developed by the innovation design team for each of these target areas, which were then provided to more specialized teams called focus forward teams for further focus and refinement. So all of these recommendations, once they're board approved, will guide principals in developing their site-specific plans for reopening. And Jeremy, what I would ask you to do is to share your experiences, if you don't mind, being on this innovation design team and the process itself.
So, you know, what I'll definitely highlight is the intensity of it. As a participant, I think Bianca used the term sprints. It really has been a sprint all the way from when we got this started in May. The meetings themselves, you know, we had a lot of thorough discussion of ideas, a lot of the questions that you're hearing from our colleagues around the state on today's webinar, but then really getting into some intense writing sessions. I think that was a key part of success, is that we used, and for those that are using different video conferencing platforms, we used the Zoom platform to use small breakout groups, and immediately split up our larger group into those small breakout groups. And then in those groups, using tools like Google Docs to write collaboratively responses to all these questions, the detailed responses that we were going to then bring back to the board for our proposed solutions. So those deep dives, I think, were really powerful. A lot of good discussion, not only on the pandemic response, but just an overall envisioning of the learning environment and our spaces going forward. The other thing I'll just say is it was a big commitment by everyone. You see the list in the lower left corner of this slide, 35, 40 or so people. This was multiple hours a day, multiple days a week for a solid process of several weeks. It really resulted in a very thorough and detailed planning process.
Thank you, Jeremy. Next slide, please. So folks have already talked about how they elicited stakeholder input or stakeholder feedback. What I wanted to do is share a little bit about what we did in Santa Ana. We conducted surveys with parents, staff, and students, along with empathy interviews that were actually having happen with students this week during their summer programs. We also hosted parent forums, we're listening sessions in both English and Spanish. So that's some of the results that we have. We have 11,201 responses from parents, and what we're doing are we're having or holding pulse surveys. So we're about to survey them again to see how their input has changed over time. And we will also do the same for staff, both certificated and classified, and with our students as well. And I'm going to turn it over to Jeremy so you can go over the timeline.
So we're more than halfway through the process. Our board continues to have great feedback. And actually, we're adding to this timeline a dedicated study session just after the July 4th holiday. That's exclusively to the topic of reopening and all of the additional feedback and information provided to the board. That will provide the key point for direction to our school sites to develop their reopening plans on a site-specific basis following that July 7th board meeting. And then, of course, we continue the sprint towards the fall reopening. I think actually, it sounds fast. We still have a lot of time. I think wars have been won and lost in a shorter period of time. So, I'm an optimist and looking further out, things that are not shown on this timeline. But we've started talking about, do we reuse this group as a mid-year innovation summit to come back and revisit what is going well, what's working, and what can we improve on. Next slide, please.
So what has guided our decisions? A coordinated and comprehensive response is essential to the health, safety, and well-being of staff, students, and families. This plan, or at least our plan, has been built based upon the guidance and recommendation of national, state, and local health officials. SAUSD has developed a 4-stage health emergency response that's aligned with California's stage response. The table that you actually see on the slide is the alignment between California and SAUSD stages. The plan is also aligned with CDE's recently released guidebook to reopening of schools. Next slide, please. So what are our guiding principles? We are committed to providing the highest quality learning experiences for all students. Students will receive high quality, innovative instructional learning that supports their academic, social, emotional development and accessibility needs. We are committed to supporting the individual needs of all students and families. Every decision will consider how the unique needs of students and families will be met. We are committed to ensuring the health, safety, and well-being of all students and staff. The health, safety of our students and staff alike will be ensured through the implementation of the plan. And this originally, and the reason I read it in this order, was the third commitment that we have, but it's now shifted to number 1 for us. We are committed to providing clear communication throughout all transitions to stakeholders. A wide range of channels will be used to provide consistent, accurate, clear, and timely communication that flows to and from the district to stakeholders in order to inform all of our decisions. So we needed these guiding principles because we wanted to establish a framework that really guided everything that we do throughout the process. Next slide, please, and I'll turn it over to Jeremy.
So Bianca mentioned our 6 target areas, and I won't reread them. They're obviously here on the slide, but I'll just share that as a facilities guy, it's really tempting to put all your focus and energy, for example, into what we call target 2, which is our space planning and our schedule planning. And that's the one that, as well as target number 1, that deals with a lot of our custodial operations. But the intent of this process was all of us were involved in all target areas. So I was assisting in writing for other target areas, which not only provide insight that we could take back to our facilities department, but provided the other elements of our district insight about facilities operations. So in some cases, we had comments coming back maybe about one of the other targets, and then it gave us an opportunity to share out something that might work or might work better if they thought about it differently when they began to understand how facilities issues work. Next slide, please. So just starting out with the first target area, right? This is are primarily concerned around health and safety, and we develop protocols around daily cleaning routines, weekly cleaning, school-wide health protocols, including hygiene practices. What does our air quality control look like? And part of what went into our plan was regular cleaning of air filters, investigating HEPA filters where possible, looking at contact control, use of gloves and the supply of gloves throughout the district, doors that can stay open. That's obviously a concern because in many cases, the opening of doors and windows is counterintuitive to the operation of our HVAC system. And so coming up with policies and procedures around that don't put undue strain on that system, but keep the options available. Temperature screening, visitor stickers, obviously for people visiting the sites and how we identify that, how we respond to illnesses when they are encountered. One of the items that we'll be pursuing is a health monitoring room on each site, which is separate from the health office and is used for non-infection related conditions. I mentioned gloves, and then Tova mentioned this as well, but we're also talking about individual manipulatives, individual bags and cases that are used on supplies by students and staff, and then how the nutrition services operation changes with eating lunch in classrooms, grab and go meals that are individually wrapped. So we can go to the next slide.
So remember, our plan has not been board approved yet, but this is what we are proposing. We are proposing offering 2 different learning models when we reopen in the fall. And remember, we're following our first guiding principle, which is to ensure the health, safety, and well-being of all students and staff. So a hybrid learning model will be offered at all levels. In addition, full distance learning will be offered to families based on interest and need. So this slide is an example of the hybrid model for elementary that we're proposing. In order to keep students safe, sites will divide their student population into 2 cohorts, Group A and Group B. Each cohort would have 2 consecutive days on campus per week. The other 3 days, students would be engaged in remote learning. Teachers would engage in 1 professional workday per week, and we've defined what that professional workday would look like. So for example, Group A would be on campus on Monday and Tuesday, and at home learning remotely on Wednesday, Thursday, and Friday. And Group B would be learning remotely on Monday, Tuesday, and Wednesday, and would be on campus live with teachers on Thursday and Friday. This schedule would allow for deep cleaning, not only to happen daily, but on Wednesday between groups A and B. Next slide, please.
Can I just add a real quick thing here, Bianca, which is
of course
a response to a question I saw in the chat about how we might be using our non-classroom spaces, things like multi-purpose rooms and other gathering spaces. And we've been talking about having spaces that be offered to students on the days that they're learning remotely. So many of our students lack access to Wi-Fi at home. They lack access to some of those tools at home. And I'm thinking of something that the CEO of Starbucks used to say many years ago, that Starbucks isn't your home and it's not your work, it's a third space. And we've been talking about the idea that our facilities also need to provide a third space to our students, something that's not home and that's not their on-site school, but for those days that they're remote learning, can we provide a distance learning study hall type of environment in some of those spaces that we're not using because of social distancing.
So exactly right, and you can see that on this slide. So what types of supports will our kiddos receive on virtual days? What Jeremy is talking about are on-site learning labs, which will serve students who really need that support based on tiered needs, and we're really looking at our vulnerable populations. In addition to that, remote office hours with their teacher during their professional workday. What happened for our kiddos, students would be able to collaborate remotely with their classmates. Teachers will provide students with feedback and check-in support, and they will still receive tutor and instructional aid support, but virtually. But those on-site learning labs that Jeremy mentioned would be a priority for us. Next slide, please.
So for transportation, our goal is uniform scheduling across the district. And that has a very real connection to the cost of transportation. It was mentioned earlier about CDC guidelines. I saw some comments in the chat. Our buses will typically be loaded at half capacity or less in certain cases. We don't maintain our own bus fleet in Santa Ana. We contract with suppliers. And many of those suppliers themselves, right, their capacity is limited. So it really becomes a supply issue. If a district wanted to go down to 25% capacity on buses, there simply isn't the bus fleet in Southern California for everyone to quadruple their use of buses. You are taking really from a pool that's shared by many districts. And so what we've looked at is based on the schedule that Bianca shared earlier. That schedule is mostly neutral to our busing, in the sense that we will have our buses at about half capacity, just as our schools will be about half. And the real exception to that is special education and special needs students, and that's now being further developed by our SPED team.
Exactly. So what we originally considered AM, PM, or early late bird kind of schedules, and realized that the cleaning was not possible, but in addition, the transportation costs, it was not fiscally responsible, which is why we are proposing this type of uniform schedule for this upcoming year. Next slide, please. So how will we ensure that we're providing the highest quality learning experiences for our kiddos? Teachers, of course, will start by building strong relationships with their students. They're going to use data to deliver quality instruction, really meeting our kiddos where they are, and providing scaffolds to ensure that they meet grade level standards. But most importantly, we're going to provide training for students, staff, and parents on what distance learning is, how to access, and the importance of participation. Next slide, please. What are some of the team's recommendations in terms of wellness? Social emotional learning teams will be established at each site to support students, staff, and families. The teams will facilitate a blended support model for families who choose remote options, and consistently and widely communicated policies will be established that address students' physical, mental, and emotional health. Next slide, please.
So for professional development, we use a platform in Santa Ana we call GoPD. This is something you can think of as an online course listing, much like you'd see for a community college. And it uses platforms like YouTube and others for delivery of online material, as well as for enrolling in and tracking progress on different elements of PD. I just last summer used it to sign up for a conversational Spanish course. And a lot of these courses are offered by our own staff, but some are actually done in conjunction with our community college in Santa Ana. The key takeaway I would offer here for any district out there is once the platform is put out, whatever that platform is, it makes it incredibly easy for people to start offering their content. So for example, in facilities, we put together some content for our school sites about small project enhancements to school sites that could be done by school principals and school leadership. We put together some YouTube videos for that and then sent that in as short self-help videos on the platform. Those are the kinds of things that we're using even more so. We're actually building a new communication studio at our district office that is very timely because we'll be really increasing the amount of pre-recorded content district-wide. But home studios work just as well. Obviously, I'm at home right now, but it looks like I am at our beautiful Santa Ana High School library. I think the technology has become so widespread and easily adopted that we're very comfortable with populating our PD platform that way. Next slide. Communication, these are all fairly well-known methods of communication that many of us are using. I'll highlight just a couple of interesting ones. Voxer, for those of you who have heard of that, is a sort of a digital walkie-talkie system that we've been using to great effect to get messaging out to large numbers of people. You see there an item about FACE workers. FACE is our Family and Community Engagement Team. These are individuals assigned to each and every school site throughout the district that are having a direct relationship with the community and parents and students. We also are talking about non-app, non-technology things that may be as simple as robocalling or phone trees to get to those families and community members who aren't as connected online. And then one thing I want to say about signage, we've been having some really nice deep dive conversations about signage and the type of signage. We've seen examples out there that are really harsh, and I would almost call some of them oppressive. They're filled with don'ts. Don't do this, don't do that. And the message seems to be, don't have fun, don't be a kid, don't enjoy school. We were very, very much in alignment that we wanted to have the opposite message about safety and health on our sites. And so we've been looking at examples from great designers outside the district. A couple of examples I'll mention to the webinar here is Legoland in Florida, Disneyland. Some of the theme parks have had some really incredible approaches to signage where they basically say, you know, here's a hand sanitizer, and instead of just saying what you shouldn't do or what you should do, you know, I think one of the signs called the hand sanitizer safety goop. You know, something that would really make a kid smile and use it at the same time. The other one was masks, encouraging kids to wear their face protection because ninjas and superheroes do that. So I think, you know, for those of us, and I think this is a good segue, as we wrap up into the dad's presentation, I'm a dad as well, and my 7-year-old, you think about what makes them smile, and that's going to be something we're really thinking about with our communication. Not only to the community, but what it looks like when they're actually on site and reading those signs as kids. Next slide.
So what are our next steps? Using the guidelines and recommendations that we actually have in our plans, sites will begin to develop their own individual plans. They, of course, are going to communicate and engage with their own particular families, site families around those plans. We're going to prepare our school sites and district facilities to ensure a safe and organized return. And we're going to provide PD, lots of PD on instructional best practices, social emotional learning, and safety protocols. So thank you. I guess at this point we can open it up for any questions that you have for Jeremy or myself.
Wow, guys, great. And Jeremy, I love your idea on the don't, because we know that when you tell a student don't run, it takes 8 to 10 seconds for his brain to actually get that. But if you say walk, it takes 1 to 2 seconds. So that goes with all the positive as well signage that you want to put up there, and in asking the student, tell him, here's what we want you to do, not don't do this. Again, it just fits in that brain a lot quicker.
Yeah, creating that positive environment at all of our campuses has been a big priority.
And I think for your staff as well, the same thing, you know, giving them positive direction instead of, you know, all the scary stuff with crosses through it, you know, is so important. So great information, great slides. Thank you guys so much. We're running just a little behind, so let's go ahead and jump to our cash dads and what they want to know. And if you'll stay on the line, that way maybe you can jump in a little bit with them. And if everyone's all right, if we run a little bit over, great, stay. If not, thank you so much. But let's get Scott Hammond from Erickson Hall on, and Kari Knowles from the DLR Group, and Nick McFadden with ProCraft Construction. Hey guys, how's it going?
Hey, how are you, Julie? Thank you so much. Next slide, please. All right, so we have the privilege to being your dads on the panel today. I know we heard from the moms a few weeks ago. They did an exceptional job. And so today we're obviously dealing with some unprecedented times, as we all know. And so we thought we would have a little bit of fun with this first graphic here. As you can see, these two handsome men that are joining me today. Myself, I'm Scott Hammond, Director of Public Relations, Governmental Affairs at Erickson Hall Construction. And joining me on this panel today is Kari Knowles. He is a principal for DLR Group. And Nick McFadden, the Director of Business Development for ProCraft Construction. So want to welcome those two guys as well. I think that what I'll start off by saying, there's been a lot of good content today from all of the presenters, Alan and Nancy, Aldo and Tom, Tova, Jeremy and Bianca. But the one thing that one of my takeaways from all of these presentations really has been adaptability and flexibility. I mean, there's a lot of good plans that are in motion, but the one thing that we're all realizing is everything's subject to change. We just don't know. We can't predict the future. We don't have a crystal ball. So that kind of segues into, you know, some of the concerns we have as parents sending our kids back to school. So without further ado, I would like to go to the next slide, please. And we're going to start off with safety. And Kari, if you want to go ahead and run down this slide. And both Kari, Nick, and I have had a conversation offline about this. But Kari, go ahead and take us through some of the safety concerns that we have as dads and as parents as a whole, looking forward to sending our kids back to school.
I would love to. Thanks, Scott. First, thanks, Cash, for this opportunity to speak from this platform. I've actually, a lot of people know I've bounced around. I've been the architect, I've been the construction manager, the program manager. I've done lots of different jobs. I've even been the teacher. But the most important job of me building schools is being a dad. And so this is a platform opportunity for us to speak in that manner. I have a 9-year-old daughter, I have a 12-year-old son, and I have a 17-year-old son. So I actually have one kid in each grade area. So one in elementary school, one in middle school, one in high school. You can imagine what the drop-offs are in the mornings when we were in school. But it's a different perspective. It brings a different opportunity for us to discuss, you know, when we're talking about the adjustment of things. I happen to be a single dad, so that makes it even more difficult when things change and things adjust, because I don't have someone standing right next to me ready and willing to help me out. So we have to think about all these things as we go along. The perspective of what we've talked about in these 3 slides, we talked about safety, we're talking about stability on the next slide, and the last one is outside the classroom. Please keep in mind, when we were thinking about what is, you know, different about dads, what makes it, what, you know, how do we look at things? It's from the perspective of providing and protecting our kids. That's a lot of what dad is about. When we lose those 2 things, it's the worst ever. The worst fear is to not be there for your child. And I know mothers have that fear as well. This is just one thing that we talk about with protection. The other one is providing growth and education opportunities. That's our best situation. So suddenly we're in what I call a triple demic. We have health issues, we have race relations issues, we have economic issues. This triple demic is threatening our ability to provide for our kids and protect our kids. So we come through at this emotionally, as I know many dads on this call can attest to and understand. So instead of hopefully reading the slide as I go along here, the one thing that's really pertinent on this entire slide is about exposure. It's really about exposure. It's harder to control exposure when kids have phones and things like that, and they can have their own access to information. Now we're even more threatened with exposure because they're exposed to health issues. That really is, it's a life and death situation. So this is a serious issue for us dads, parents in general, to making sure that we're hitting these safety needs that are out there. The temperature taking. I love the solution that Jeremy brought up about having the communication with the phone trees, having the health monitoring rooms. These are the things that are going to help to solve the issues that we have on this safety list. So again, I'm assuming you're reading a lot of the slide, but really want to bring to heart that this is an exposure issue that us dads can't ignore. We want to make sure we're hitting it as best we can. Nick, do you have anything else to add to that?
No, I don't at this time. I think you're getting it right on the head.
Next slide.
So Nick, why don't you talk a little bit about stability? And we know that our kids thrive off structure. We know that to be true. We have 3 kids personally in our household from grade levels of an incoming freshman in high school. We have a middle schooler and an elementary schooler, and I can tell you right now that all three really thrive off that structure, but especially our two younger ones, they really need that. This whole last couple of months of going through school in a complete distance learning format was quite the struggle for us internally. Both my wife and I both work, and trying to juggle that amongst all of the series of questions that they had throughout the day made it a bit of a challenge. So structure being a real critical one for us in our household, as for many parents and families. But go ahead, Nick, why don't you take this slide?
Well, Scott, just as important as structure is, it's complemented with stability. And without stability, kids just kind of flounder. So I have 4 kids in my house in 2 different districts and different age groups. So keeping that structure in place, keeping that stability in place is really important for me. And I know it is for a lot of kids in the overall mindset of academics. So how are we going to create some kind of routine, right? What does the structure look like? Are they getting up in the morning? Are they going to class? Do they know what to expect? And what does that look like, and how does it play out day in and day out? So one of the things that we all talked about was, what happens when COVID happens in your school or somebody gets sick? How does that disrupt structure? How does the playground activity, disrupt structure, things that they become used to and depend on? So that said, what one-on-one instruction? What does that look like? Is a teacher being responsive and accountable? I know when we did at-home schooling, teachers were slow to respond, and they granted, teachers had a lot that they had to deal with when it came to being able to pivot and respond and understand the technology. But are they being responsive? What kind of care, what kind of learning environment are the kids getting into? Is it meaningful learning? And then what are the classroom requirements going to look like? I have a fear of kids sitting inside of a plexiglass shield cage, so to speak, or I think we talked about earlier, are they going to be forced to wear masks? And I know Alan mentioned this, what happens when they go to the bathroom and they come back and it's soaking wet, because we all know kids are going to be kids. So what does all that look like? And those are growing concerns.
Nick, real quick, I just want to go back to the teacher responsiveness and accountability. So in our household, our youngest, a 4th grader who will be going into 5th grade, I can't tell you, she probably had an average, no kidding, about 15 to 20 questions a day. And it was really challenging for my wife and I, as we're both trying to work and balance that parent teaching thing as well as we can with this distance learning model that was put in place. But the struggle that we had was that her teacher would go unresponsive for like a day, sometimes a day and a half. And when you're trying to juggle your work schedule, that work-life balance thing, and with your kids' schoolwork, and when they're left with, until we hear back from the teacher, I can't really help you with moving forward on this assignment. Why don't you just go read for 30 more minutes? It became a challenge. And I know it had to be equally as frustrating for the school district and the teacher direct, specifically, but that was definitely a challenge that we've endured for the last couple of months. So that's a big one for us, is that just that responsiveness. If distance learning is going to be the model, I know, speaking from our family, we like to see all of our kids go back to school full time. They need that social interaction. They're actually really excited about going back to school, but just not having that one-to-one instruction. I think every kid's different. Our oldest can thrive off distance learning. She's an overachiever, and good for her. I'm glad she's like that. But our other 2 kids aren't like that. They really do depend and rely on that one-to-one instruction. And so I'm very hopeful that that's able to be accomplished. But go ahead, Nick.
Well, Scott, I mean, that's to our next point, right? Who is teaching them, and what are we teaching them? The who and the what, right? Are the parents teaching because they're on a hybrid schedule where they're a couple days at home and a couple days at school? What is the quality of education they're going to receive in that? Or are they at school full time, where they're, they're back in that routine, they're back working with the teachers. And then how does that look? How does that transfer? Because not all children are going to learn at the same level. So how are we going to balance those things? My youngest, he's a slow learner, and he's kind of had a rough go through teachers getting sick and teachers transferring. So it seems like every year, and he's in 4th grade now, but every year he's had some sort of issue that created a lot of instability in his routine that hindered him. And so moving him into a distance learning environment, he was real quick to just check the box, get through the little program and move on. And, who knew if it was right or wrong? And because I'm working, I couldn't sit over his shoulder and manage him or double check his work all day. Or if he was in a big hurry to get back to Fortnite, he would just, get through it even faster, check the box, even if I told him I wanted to look at it before he submitted, it was still submitted. And we never saw it, and then would slow to get feedback from the teacher. So as a parent's concerned, what are we doing to provide these things? Right. And so now I'm fighting with 2 of my kids because we put them into a tutor program through summer, where 2 out of the 4 are going through a tutor program, just to keep up on things, and the other 2 didn't need it. So they're good. But the argument in the house is, now what's fair, right? How come I don't get a summer and they do? And so those are challenges that come home. And then, we look to the school to provide those types of securities.
Well, that's a very good point, Nick. And I think one thing that I would add to what you're saying, I like the summer tutoring thing, because I know we made sure all of our kids adhered to the work that they were required to do. But I can tell you that the way I understand it is grades were not going to be affected once we went to this distance learning model. So I know, like I said, our kids, we forced them to do their work, get their work done. But I do know other people within our community, believe it or not, whose parents were working full time, didn't have time to cater to their kids' needs. They just decided that they would, let them slide. Summer started early, I guess you could say, for a lack of a better way of putting it. So I wonder, I'm sure districts have accounted for, that catch up that some kids may have to have in order to start that next grade level, because the last couple of months in this distance learning model, they may have not been up to snuff with, proceeding to the next grade. Like our daughter, from 4th to 5th grade, it was a challenge. It was pulling hair. So I think there may be some refreshers that need to be done to start the 5th grade school year for her. But anyhow, so that being said,
Scott, to your point about grades, schools putting grades on hold, that only works for a certain point, right? In my household, I can care less about your grade. I care about your effort. And if you're going to give 100% effort, the grade's going to be there or it's not. And if it's not, then that's okay too, as long as you tried and gave everything that you had and that you did your best. And as parents, we can see our children, right? And I struggle with a slow learner in the house. So making sure that he's up to speed and that's communicated in the household, right? Are we all giving the same effort? So it was important that we all gave the effort, whether in fact, we didn't even tell the kids that the grades didn't matter. But that's my household. Every household's different in the way that they look at things.
Well, I think in line with what you just said, we're talking about stability. The other word to call us is consistency. And that's a key for a lot of success for students, is just knowing what's coming up next. Even if it is an A-B schedule like we talked about before, at least they know what's coming up next. What's an advantage to the situation of all the hybrids? I see some of the chats going on as well. The hybrid learning could be an advantage for a lot of students that don't always work in one system, in one learning type. We've learned that over the years, that everybody has different learning types. So to see the hybrid opportunity actually puts kids in an opportunity to be successful at least half the time. Obviously, we want them 100% of the time, but at least it gives them opportunity to, number one, know what's coming next, and number two, really shine in where they learn best, whether it be online or in the classroom. So I think there's some good opportunities. I think the main thing, what Nick has said, and Scott, you attest as well, as parents, we have to keep it positive. I know we're going to lose a bunch of people off the call, but I want to just enlist, keep it positive. Jeremy said that with the signage. keep it positive, keep it positive. It will emulate down to the kids without a doubt, no matter what
Absolutely.
situation we're in.
Absolutely. Next slide, please. Okay, and so finally we have outside the classroom and what that looks like. And we've had several of our presenters today discuss that. Bus transportation is a huge one. I can't imagine how challenging that must be for school districts to put forth a game plan for that. But Kari, I'm going to start with you in looking at some of these bullets. Which ones stand out to you as some of the stuff that may be some concerns that you have in your household?
Well, it's the underlying bullet that's not on here called unknown. You know what I mean? It's the unknown of if something happens at school and everybody has to go home, who's going to pick them up? How are they going to get picked up? Do they have a list of only 3 people that can pick up and you're out of town? So it's all the unknown of this slide that really, really affects how we operate as parents and how we can, like I said, be there for our kids. So we really have to understand that those last minute adjustments and things like that is something we're just going to have to work on as a team to make sure we enlist. And it's, you know, it's not just team on this call, it's, you know, parental teams and backup plans and all that kind of stuff, stuff that we've talked about as well. There has to be 2 or 3 backup plans for every scenario that's out there because the unknown is so strong right now. But I think it's, you know, I appreciate what's going on in the call prior to us because we're always talking about the what ifs. There's a lot of discussion about the what ifs to the details of what if, you know, a particular desk is turned sideways away from the classroom. Those are the what ifs that we have to talk about, and we have to be able to discuss what's the plan A, what's the plan B for the different scenarios.
Absolutely. No, that's a very good point. I know Tom brought up in his presentation, you know, for the parents out there that have high schoolers, I mean, sports, such an integral piece to the high school experience, performing arts, leadership, that sort of stuff. So our daughter is an incoming freshman and she's super excited. She made the varsity dance team. She's been dancing her whole life, so she's super excited. But well, what does that look like? You know, she can't wait to get on campus and experience high school life. But here we are dealing with this pandemic, and it's kind of put some a stranglehold on her early high school career, if you will. But a lot of Zoom practices are going on with her dance team right now, and she's concerned. She's super excited about getting on campus and being a part of this team and leadership and realizing that may not even come to fruition this year, which is pretty unfortunate. But Nick, do you have anything you want to add to this slide?
No, I think everybody did a great job at touching on a lot of these points and Kari's to Kari's point, the unknown, right? And back to the point of the presentation is the concern is how are we going to provide some sort of normalcy for our kids, and then understanding that there's a lot of unknowns, and how do we prepare them for that? So
there's a comment from Alan talking about making sure you hear the parents' voices. So thank you for that, Alan, in your district and all other districts that are, well, just keep encouraging, find out, you know, everyone has a voice and every parent has a voice, and they have lots of good opportunities for good solutions out there. So the voices, the forums, and then just having patience and empathy with each other. I think that's a stronghold for all of the pandemics that are happening, is just really understanding that empathy is the first step for understanding. After understanding, then you start to come up with great solutions. So just let's all just, you know, keep it positive as much as we can, and keep talking about the what ifs, keep talking about the unknowns, because there are solutions out there. We've come up with some great ones already. Even on this call, I saw some that I haven't seen yet. So great solutions out there. Let's keep it positive for our kids is what I would say in the end.
Very good. And we'll turn it back over to you, Julie.
Kari, Nick, Scott, thank you so much. That just, I mean, again, you're right. Patience is going to be needed for all of us. And we see that a lot of people have, you know, I think sometimes they get a little with the world changing, they lose their patience a little quicker. So I think if we all remember that patience is number one in kindness, and that, you know, no matter what it is, a solution can be found. And so coming together, talking, bringing these concerns up is what we do as an organization, as CASH. Bring these in, we always will find solutions. So, all right, I want to thank the other panelists as well: Nancy, Alan, Tom, Aldo, Tova, Bianca, and Jeremy. Of course, thank you, and Mr. Duffy for gathering all this together on this webinar. And a big thanks to Samantha Campbell, the whiz behind our Zoominars. So the next webinar is Disinfecting Classroom and Indoor Spaces to Achieve Health and Safety Goals. As we mentioned last week, things are going to change a little bit with our webinar starting in July. With everything moving fast forward to prepare for opening schools, we're going to go back to our shorter format of 1 hour and 15 minutes, and it's going to start at 11. And we will also be on hiatus until July 9th. And again, the biggest one is now you're going to need to be a CASH member to view and receive the materials and recordings. So if you're not already a CASH member, please take this opportunity to visit the CASH website and sign up and join. Also, save the date for Tuesday, July 28th for a CASH Maintenance Network and School Energy Coalition webinar. CASH, myself, and all the presenters today on the webinar extend our best wishes for continued good health to all of you. Gratitude and thanks to all our essential workers and frontline heroes out there. As we leave you today, remember the CASH organization is here to help and be a resource to all of you, and we'll keep you informed through emails and webinars as our school industry continues to evolve. Again, from day to day, it all changes at each district. It's so important that we in the school construction industry, we remember to share vital information with each other, just like we're doing today. Remember, you're not alone with these challenges, and we are smarter and better together. So I encourage each one of you to reach out to a neighboring district, your county office of education, a local associate member, or a CASH staff with any challenges you may be facing. And our organization, our network, will find the right fit and solution to help you out. So we're all here to help each other. So please take full advantage of this network and opportunity. And thank you all, and we'll see you in 2 weeks, July 9th. Thanks. Have a great 4th of July. Take care.
Thank you, Julie. Thank you, speakers. Great job, everybody.